Morning, brothers and sisters. Good to see you this morning. I know I didn't get to everybody, but happy Father's Day to those that I didn't get to. It is indeed good to see you this morning, and it is a great day that we can finally be recognized for the great men that we are.
That's right.
Amen. Sorry, I had to get that in. All right, so I wanted to go ahead and continue looking at Samson. We looked at Samson about 3 weeks ago or so, and I initially said that I struggle with this lesson, this story, because Samson does not seem like he's a godly man, but he is God's man to bring the Israelites out of the Philistine captivity at that point in time. So there is something in there for us. Samson was, we remember, just by way of a quick recap, Samson's mom and dad were approached by an angel of God. This angel said that they were going to give birth to a baby boy. He was going to be a Nazirite. Nazirite was a special vow that was unto God, set apart and holy, essentially. They couldn't drink, couldn't be near a dead body, they couldn't shave their head, and there were certain things to keep them pure and holy. And then but Samson just, he was given everything he needed. He had a great start, but he just didn't finish his race well. He accomplished what God had for him to accomplish, yes, but it's not always the finish, but sometimes it's how we finish the race. And so I kind of we're gonna move on into the story, and that's part of why I have some issue with this. I struggle with this story. So we talked about how the angel approached his mom and dad. It's pretty significant, his beginning, because regardless of what time frame one might find themselves in, to have an angel of the Lord come and predict your coming and come and say that you're going to be the man. That's a lot to have on your shoulders. And so I'm sure he carried that with him all the way up until he became a judge, till he was instituted as a judge. And I'm sure that framed his worldview in many respects. It probably made him a little arrogant. I mean, not only is he extremely strong and powerful, but he's God's man. I'm the man, and that probably framed his worldview. So let's just get into it. I want to look at 3 of the things that he struggled with, and then we'll make some application. As we all know, Samson was impulsive. He was very impulsive. It didn't seem like he gave much thought to much of anything. And if you read Judges chapter 13 through 16, that will come out in that story over and over and over again. Judges 14, 1 through 3 talks about how Samson, obviously they're under Philistine captivity. They're enslaved, and I don't know how that looked on a day-to-day basis, but they evidently had some room to move. But he went down, and he was in Timnath, and he saw this lady, and she was beautiful. I mean, we can surmise that because it says he had to have her. He went back to his mom and dad, said, I need this woman, and I need you to get her for me. Bear in mind, God's people were forbade to marry outside of their own people. So you see his impulsive nature. He saw this woman, and he had to have her, regardless of what culture said, regardless of what God said. And the thing that's interesting, in 14 14 about the end of 3 and then going into 4, his mom and dad say, "Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." And then we go into 4. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord. So that's kind of what I struggle with in some respects. It was forbade for them to marry outside of their own people, but it seems that in this particular instance, it was sanctioned at the very least by God. But we see that he saw her and he needed her, or he thought he needed her. We also see that, and this woman, or this incident where he entered into a relationship with her, everything flows from this one incident, and we'll see that as we go throughout this whole thing. So he saw this woman, and I guess they probably went into some kind of negotiations, and then sometimes later, him and his mom and dad are going down, and he goes down a little bit later, and they are going to they're going to go for the wedding feast. And earlier he had come across a lion, a young lion. It says, come upon him. He killed it with God's help, it says, and then it was just lying there on the side of the road when they went down to meet the woman. And then sometime later, they're going back for the wedding feast. Well, he goes back and he sees this lion that's dead, and some time has passed, and there's several honeycombs in it. So the bees have made their home in it, and they're living in it. And remember, it's forbade for him to touch a dead body, whether it be a human or otherwise. So he takes his hand, he reaches inside, and he grabs the honey out of it, and he starts eating it, and he gives some to his parents when he gets there. And so as they're in the wedding feast, he gives them this riddle. So I don't mess it up. It says, out of the eater, this is in 14. Out of the eater something to eat, out of the strong something sweet. So he said, basically, if you can answer my riddle, I'll give you 30 pairs of clothes. If you can answer, sorry, let me make sure I said that right. If you can answer the riddle, I will give you 30 pairs of clothes. And if you fail to answer the riddle, then you will give me 30 pairs of clothes. So his wife to be, I don't think it had been finalized at this point in time. His wife to be nags him for 7 days, and finally at the end of the 7th day, he gives her the answer to the riddle. She then takes the answer to probably her in-laws or her countrymen, and gives them the riddle. And he says, had you not plowed with my heifer, you would have not known what my riddle was. So this is where we see his impetuous or his impulsive nature come out. So instead of paying for the clothes, like most of us would do, he goes out and kills 30 innocent men, presumably men, and then takes those clothes. I'm sure that they were bloody. Takes those clothes and pays his debt. So we see that impulsive behavior come out once again. Now, just in the essence of time, I'm not reading all of this, but I encourage you to read it. This is an interesting story, at the very least. The next thing that we see, his impetuous, or I keep saying that word, his impulsive nature is when we see, so he killed these 30 men, and then he went back to his mother and father for a short time, for a while, I don't know how long, but then he comes back and he's gonna get with his wife. Well, when he comes back, he finds out that his father-in-law, for lack of a better word, because he's not really his father-in-law anymore, because his father-in-law had given his wife to his best friend, or one of his groomsmen, it seems like. And so then he goes off in a rage, he gathers up 300 pairs of foxes, ties firebrands or torches to their tails, sets them off. They burn up the olives, they burn up the wheat, they burn up all of the crops, many of the cities, I'm sure, too, and just caused total chaos. In addition, that caused the Philistines to be upset, understandably so. So then they come at him. Well, first his Israelite brothers come up to him and say, "Can we take you to them?" He says, "Yes, you can take me to them as long as you don't kill me and you only let them kill me." Well, they take him up there, tied him with 2 fresh new ropes, and then when they come upon him, this is when we see him shed the 2 new ropes, pick up the jawbone of a donkey, and slay 1,000 men with this jawbone of a donkey. We also see how he played this dangerous game of cat and mouse with Delilah. So sometime later it says he fell in love with Delilah, and then they got together and she was messing with him, and he kept playing with her until eventually she rather stupidly, I would say, he told her the actual truth, and she did what she'd been doing that whole time. She turned him over and cut his hair and turned him over, and then that kind of brought about his demise. So that's a lot, right? Holy cow. There's a lot in there. But I think that clearly demonstrates that he was an impulsive man. It didn't seem like he put a whole lot of thought into what he did or what he said. Now we know from Scripture that the very last verse in chapter 16 of Judges says that he ruled for 20 years. So we know he ruled for 20 years, but this is the only telling that we have of Samson. So we don't know if he was a good judge or a bad judge. It would almost seem that, if you take this time frame and you apply it to the rest of his judgeship, you can kind of surmise for yourself whether or not he might have been a good judge, but that is what it is. So he struggled with his impulsive nature, and as we full well know, he struggled with his sexual desire. He struggled to control his sexual desire. As we talked about earlier, he was a strong man, and he was called out specifically to be God's man to save his people, and I'm sure that had kind of an impact on his state of mind. But I'm sure he didn't probably limit himself to much of anything. We see in chapter 14 in verse 2 how this the lady that we just talked about initially, his first wife, how he wanted her, he saw her, he was motivated more than likely out of lust for this woman, and he had to have her immediately, and so that he got her for a short time, but that instituted a whole turn of events that would come about that would ultimately forge his life, or forge the path for his life. In chapter 16:1, this is after his wife's been given to somebody else. He sees a woman of the night, and he goes in with her, and he spends time with her, and he gave into his desire in that respect with her at that particular time. And then chapter 16 verse 4, it says, and sometime later he loved Delilah. I don't know if that was motivated by lust or not, but I mean, it's kind of in the standard operation modus operandi, of his whole way of life or his whole being. So it may well be that played into that as well. Now we do know that Samson was indeed the strongest man of that time, but that in that regards, he was very, very weak. An interesting thing, once again, I'll probably say this a couple times, but You know, all of these are violations of God's law, but it doesn't seem like God condemned him for that. Oh, which is interesting to me. And then lastly, the last thing that he dealt with before we get into his redemption is he struggled with his commitment to God. We remember that he was a Nazirite. And we remember that I'm just going to go ahead and read it real quick. This is Numbers 6, chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. I'll go ahead and turn over there. Numbers chapter 6. First 6 verses, and it reads like this. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or a woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of separation to the Lord as a Nazirite, he or she must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from wine or other fermented drink. He must not drink grape juice, or eat grapes or raisins. As long as he is a Nazirite, he must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor even drink, or even the seeds or skins." Verse 5, during the entire period of his vow of separation, no razor may be used on his head, and he must be holy until the period of his separation to the Lord is over. He must let the hair of his head grow long. Throughout the period of his separation to the Lord, he must not go near a dead body. And then we're going into 7. Even if his own father or mother or brother or sister dies, he must not make himself ceremonially unclean on account of them, because the symbol of his separation to God is on his head. And verse 8, throughout the period of separation, he is consecrated to the Lord. Consecrated to the Lord means he is special, set apart for God's special use, God's special purpose, God's special designation. So that was what it meant to be a Nazirite. So it wasn't something that was lightly taken, or shouldn't have been lightly taken. But in Samson's case, it doesn't really seem like he worried too much about that. He didn't worry about what God said about marrying women outside of his own tribe. He didn't worry about being near a dead body. When he killed the lion and he killed the 30 men and he killed the 1,000 men, didn't seem like that bothered him too much. He definitely didn't seem like he minded telling Delilah about where his power resided, which was in his hair. Was probably more in his vow to God, but when she cut his hair, that's when. So he struggled just doing the basic things that God had asked him to do. Now, once again, it does seem that when you read through this verse, like when he's killing the 1,000 men, it says, "And the power of the Lord came upon him powerfully." So it seems like God did not condemn him for these actions. So Samson, I went too far. So those are all the things that Samson struggled with. So now we'll move into his redemption, or his actually fulfilling what the Lord had asked him to do. So up to this point in time, it's things are not going well. He cuts his hair. He's imprisoned. His eyes are gouged out. He's put on a mill, pushing a mill around in circle, grinding out grain or something like that, and he is essentially pulled out of the jail whenever needed to be made sport of. During this time, his hair's starting to grow back. He's starting to get some of his strength back, and that's kind of where we kind of take up his personal redemption, as it were. Judges 16:23 through 30. It reads like this. Oh, there it is. So this is the death of Samson. Eventually. Now the rulers of the Philistine, they assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Verse 27. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of Philistine were there. And on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, O sovereign Lord, remember me, O God. Please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself, and against them, his right hand on one, his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people that were in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So in Samson's own unique way, he's going to get things done kind of his way, but he still accomplishes the goal that God had put before him. The goal that was put before him was to bring his people out of slavery, and by killing all of these rulers and these high authorities, that accomplished that. Now Samson didn't succeed in doing things in a godly way, though he did succeed in doing what God had asked him to do. And so that's where some of my issue comes in, what I've always struggled with. But you just think about, what if he had been a godly man? You know, what more could he have accomplished? He could have lived, and he could have continued to do the Lord's will. He could have been a godly man, a godly example to people, but for whatever reason, he is the way he is, and this is the story that we have. So what are some lessons that we can learn from Samson and what he went through? There are no advantages without challenges. No matter how talented, how many advantages or how many opportunities we have to work hard to succeed. No contest is won without effort. God provides us our raw talent, but it is up to us to hammer out that talent into something useful through practice and work. Another lesson that we can learn is deal with our sins early. Samson was impulsive, he was sexually impure, and that got him into trouble all throughout his whole life. You know, we're real good at justifying things. I am. Let me just say I am. And I think we all are, to be honest with you. We justify that it's just a little this, it's just a little that. It's not a big sin. It's just a little indiscretion or whatever. You know, I let my mouth slip. But we have directions. Talks about watching your tongue. Let no vain or profane words come from your mouth. Talks about our eyes. Guard your eyes. He talks about your heart. Guard your heart, for it is everything comes from it. If Samson teaches us anything, it is that we need to be careful. No sin is too small, and James 2 talks about. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I was just thinking about it. James 2 talks about how sin, how it works. It's a deceitful little stinker. In that it's like a seed, and I think it's James 2, but it talks about James 1:13. Yeah, James 1:13 through 15, and it reads like this: When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. So this little sin, this little indiscretion, this little thing, it will grow if I don't deal with it. It's just like a weed that grows in our gardens. If we don't pick it up, if we don't pull it out and pluck it, it will eventually grow into a full-grown thing that we can't deal with. So deal with your sins and deal with them early. The other thing is about, one other thing about that is, just because I deal with my sin today doesn't mean I don't have to deal with it tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after that. We are never going to be done with sin because Satan is never done with us. Satan has an agenda for you, and he has an agenda for me. And that agenda is that we be in hell with him together. And if he can get us on these little sins that grow into huge, big sins that we can't control, then he's got us, and he knows that. So he's never going to let up on us. And so therefore, we never can let up on constantly going to God in prayer, constantly being repentant, and constantly asking for forgiveness for the sins that we commit, and then every day trying better and better to not sin, though we know that we will. But it's the act of trying not to sin instead of actively seeking it. Okay, and so then the third thing that we can learn is God will come to your rescue. Samson learned a lesson that his people learned centuries before. When you finally lose everything and you cry out to God for help, God will rescue you. Samson had lost everything. He had lost his position, his power, his privileges. He had been reduced to being less than an ordinary man. He was a blind slave pushing a mill around in circle all day long for whoever knows how long. But when he came to God, I presume he repented. He came to God. He asked God to be with him once more. God did, and God was there, and God rescued him, though it ended up taking his life. A person's talent or their strength or whatever it is that they possess, whatever it is that we view as important in our lives, does not impress God. But what does impress God is a heart that is penitent, and a heart that is repentant, that wants to do better, a heart that wants to please God. So how are you using your talents and opportunities given to you by God? Because we all have them. Some of them, we're all different. I look at every one of us, and we're all different in many respects. And we all have different talents. And we all have different struggles. But how are we using our talents for God? And the opportunities that we've been given. Are we living up to our potential? Or are we being like Samson and squandering everything that we've been given? Is the story of Samson like your own story? A great beginning, but because of self-indulgence and sin, not such a great result. Why not do today what Samson wanted to do? Why not rededicate those talents to God and ask him to give you a fresh start? And you can do that now. If there's anybody that needs to be baptized, needs to change the way that they've been living, if there's anybody that needs to rededicate themselves because they've maybe dropped the ball a little bit, you can do so as we come now and stand and sing.
wanted to make a comment on Samson in that it was kind of the one account that really brought me back into thinking about coming with God, because it's a short account of a person in our history, but it doesn't mean the impact of it's any less powerful. And what it says to me is that he was a chosen man, and though he maybe didn't always do what was best, God was still always there with him to save his people in the end, because they were in captivity, so they didn't make the best choice. But in the end, God was always with them, and that it all comes down to faith. You know, he's a hero of faith, as mentioned in Hebrews, and didn't matter how many times I read it, just one day driving in the car, it just hit me. Faith is what it is. If you ain't got faith, there ain't nothing you're doing that's worth it. So it comes down to, as long as you turn back to God and you ask for that forgiveness, he'll be there with you, and he'll never leave you. Amen. So with that, living by faith, 560. I care not today what tomorrow may bring, if shadow or sunshine or rain. The Lord I know ruleth o'er everything, and all of my worry is vain. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love. From all harm safe, in his sheltering arm, I'm living by faith and feel no alarm. Though tempests may blow and the storm clouds arise, obscuring the brightness of life, I'm never alarmed at the overcast skies. The Master looks on at the strife. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love. From all harm safe in his sheltering arms, I'm living by faith and feel no alarm. Our Lord will return to this earth some sweet day. Our troubles will then all be o'er. The Master so gently will lead us away beyond that blessed heavenly shore. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in his great love. From all harm safe in his sheltering arm, I'm living by faith and feel no alarm. We'll close with a prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to come and learn from your word and take the lessons that we can take from it and see how it might apply to our lives, and see how everything you've given to us is for our betterment, that in struggles and trials, even if it is from our own doing, from not seeing what we should do and what you want for us, that in the end of it, you're still there with us, guiding us, and that you'll never leave us, and you're never going to turn your backs from us. It's only us who walk away from you, and we still have that option, though, to turn back and come home like the prodigal son, and much like Samson did there at the end, to come to you and ask for that help, and that you be with them, so that we might be able to glorify you and do your will. We ask that you stay with us this week, and that you guide us as we go our separate ways, and that we always keep you on our minds and in our hearts. It's in your Son's name we pray this. Amen. Amen.
Pretty good.